Welcome to It's a Brain Thing. I may lose my voice a little bit here and there. I've been having a little cold, so if it doesn't hold up here, I'll do the best I can. I'll whisper or something, I suppose. So welcome to It's a Brain Thing. And this month's edition, we're going to talk about addictions. I did this talk, it's probably been over a year ago, maybe a year and a couple months ago. I did this particular talk, but I want to do it again because I never got it filmed. So it's not on the internet, and it's also it hasn't been on TV yet. The reason I think this is such an important topic to talk about is because I think, we talk a lot in here about stigma, and when things aren't understood very well, that people stigmatize them and discriminate against them. With things like depression, that's starting to get a little better. I think if you say to somebody that you have depression, maybe they don't blame you as much as they used to in the olden days. Okay, they still have some of that. There's certainly still some of that. But with addictions, it seems like it's still something that we all tend to think of. Well, somebody's got a weakness if they're addicted, And I think one of the things that's coming out now about the science behind addiction is something that I think folks that have worked in this field have known for a long time, which is that this is not a character flaw. This is an illness of the brain. And so what I want to share with you guys tonight is some sort of my personal experience with seeing folks with addiction, and kind of share with you where I started and where I am now with kind of my own knowledge, but also share with you some information, some of the science that some of the researchers in the field have been doing, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. So first of all, where did I start out? As you guys know, I came out of residency in 1998. I started seeing patients in Newcastle. And I had a couple of therapists there that challenged me. One of the things that I was doing was I was thinking the same way a lot of people think, unfortunately, and that is that I couldn't do much for folks with addiction. They just had to make the conscious decision, give it up, don't use again, that kind of thing. And I would almost blame them sometimes if I was trying to treat their depression and they were addicted too. I think I was guilty of saying, I'm sorry, it's your fault you're using, I can't help it, I can't do anything about it, And that was kind of ignorance on my part. And some of the therapists challenged me, and they said, why do you look at that differently than bipolar disorder or some of these other illnesses that you treat? I stopped and I thought, I don't know, I guess I shouldn't probably. And so then the more I started seeing patients and started learning about this, I'll give you an example. I saw a woman who was addicted to cocaine, and she knew she was on probation and she was getting drug screens, and she knew if she used again, she was going to lose her kids. And she used again. And so I thought to myself, now, is this just a choice? Is it just a conscious choice? I just don't want to use again, and as easy as that? It can't be that easy, right? If it was that easy, we wouldn't have addictions, right? If it was that easy, nobody would ever use a substance of abuse. And for that matter, one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is that we think that a lot of these things, gambling, sexual addiction, overeating, food addiction, we think that these things are somehow linked, and it's the same kind of pathway or process in the brain that has gone awry that leads to these things. So if it was so easy to just not overeat, we wouldn't have obesity, would we? Right? I mean, these things aren't that easy. If it's so easy to quit smoking, you wouldn't have to take medicines, and you wouldn't have all this problem, all these people addicted to cigarettes, right? It's not easy. It's not just a conscious choice. I learned that early on, and I guess when I start talking to you about the parts of the brain that are involved, it's going to kind of make sense, at least I hope. And if it doesn't, please ask questions, okay? So I guess, a lot of times in here, I challenge you guys to think about your brain in a different way. I'm going to do that again tonight. There's some things in your brain, a lot of things in your brain, that happen all the time that you don't even think about, you're not even aware of. So let me throw out some of these things here that have to do with addiction, okay? Think about how these things might have to do with addiction. But for example, why do you eat over and over again? I mean, you taste food and it tastes good. I don't know if you ever none of us consciously feel like we have to think every time we want to eat, right? We just sort of know when it's time to eat and we eat, right? And then the foods that we like, we eat them over and over again, don't we? We like them. Okay, there's got to be a part of our brains that says, God, that tastes pretty good. I'd like to have some more of that. I think I'll do that again. That was pleasurable. So eating is something that is one of those primitive things that our brains, even animals' brains, have, so that they'll do it again. If you didn't remember or it wasn't pleasurable to eat, humans would have died a long time ago, right? Because we wouldn't have eaten and we'd have starved. Same thing with sex, right? If sex wasn't pleasurable, we wouldn't do it. And what would happen to our species, or any animal species for that matter? They would become extinct because it wasn't pleasurable. So think about it for a second. Where does the pleasure come from? Where does that drive or that motivation to eat and drink and have sex, where does that stuff come from? It has to be the brain, right? So the easy way to think of this is I call it the reward center. There's a reward center in your brains. It's not that simple because it's not only a reward center. It's also a part of your brain that lights up when you eat something that tastes terrible. Okay, and there has to be a way in your brain for it to know, gee, I tasted that, it was pretty good, I want to do that again. And remember that that was what I ate and it was good, and I'll do it again. By the same token, what if you ate something that tasted like crap, or something that made you puke all over the place, right? You want to remember, hey, that wasn't very good, I don't want to do that again. Okay? So there's a part of your brain that does that. I don't know if you guys ever thought about that before, but if you haven't, then I need you to, because this is where addictions come from, we think. This is one part of the brain. So think about this pathway in the brain, and there are some chemicals involved in this pathway in the brain. Last month we talked about dopamine as it pertained to dopamine in some parts of the brain being too high and schizophrenia, and these folks would see things and hear things they couldn't control, they weren't real, We think dopamine is one of the primary things that's involved in this pathway, this reward center that I just talked about, okay? One thing that has been found is that this reward center in the brain in folks with addictions, or at least folks at risk for addictions, it isn't working like it should. Okay, so they'll eat a meal, or they'll have sex, or whatever, and those are just regular everyday things that for most of us, those should light up our reward center and say, okay, let's do that again. With addictions, these folks' reward center isn't wired like it should be. The underlying issue, we think, is there's not enough of this dopamine, but don't worry about remembering that. Just think that part of the brain isn't wired and isn't working like it should. Okay, so the messages don't get through as well. Now, for example, what happens if a person like this that doesn't have enough transmission, enough of that part of the brain isn't working very well? What happens if they take something that stimulates that part of the brain 5 to 10 times greater than sex or food or regular everyday things? Okay, what example of something like that would be cocaine or methamphetamine or alcohol, okay? So what happens is the folks take this stuff, it lights up their brain. It makes up for what they don't have enough of, plus, okay? Well, they did this study, and they wanted to see, how do we know that this not having enough this activity in this reward center, how do we know that's related at all to addiction? They did this fascinating study where they took, one of the things they did was they took these folks and they put them into a scanner, and they could scan that part of the brain to see how active it is, okay, at baseline. And then they found that some folks had normal reward centers, and some folks had lower than normal reward centers, okay? Then they gave them both methamphetamine. And they asked them, how did that feel? And the folks that didn't have enough dopamine or didn't have enough of that reward center wasn't working right, they said, man, I like that. I want some more of that. It lit their brains up. And when you looked on the scans, it lit their brains up like a Christmas tree. When I say lit them up, I mean the activity in that part of the brain was showing like it was just boom, it was gangbusters, okay? Now the people that had regular sort of run-of-the-mill normal reward centers, they gave them the methamphetamine too, And these folks said, I can take it or leave it. I don't know if it doesn't do much for me. You look on the brain scan, it didn't go up much more than where they were to start with. That's fascinating, right? That they're correlating brain activity with how it feels when they use the drug. So that gives you some idea that now they're able to sort of correlate the underactivity in this part of the brain with why it feels so good when they use the drug. Okay? Okay, now that's not all the story, but that's part of the story. I want you to keep that in mind, so that here's a person that could be at risk for addiction. They're walking through life, they don't have enough of this reward center. It's not working like it should. So everyday stuff that should be pleasurable, that should be good enough, is not good enough. Okay? But then all of a sudden, they're teenagers or whatever, and somebody says, hey,